Myself in this day and age. It's the cool kids doing this. Pretty accurate, apart from one of the cats is more of a tuxedo cat. But yeah, the whiskey, the drum kit, the keyboards. So I'm Diana. You can find me on most of the internet as Broccolini. I answer to both if you forget what my actual name is. At GitHub, we tend to call each other by our usernames. No one knows who Diana is. Everyone knows who Broccolini is. And so I am head of design at GitHub, and that means I lead pretty much all the design teams, really. So we have a brand and marketing team, a couple of product design teams, customer research, design infrastructure, which is like our design systems team, and design engineers as well. So I wanted to start off telling you a little bit about my story. So before I got into the job I have now, I started off in print in the UK, and I didn't realize that before this, I didn't realize that I could get into graphic design. I didn't really know that that was a job that I could have. I kind of stumbled across this. I had always been interested in creative and technical pursuits and thought that I had to choose between something like IT and something more creative. And luckily landed in the print center, and it was around a time where the web was starting to be a thing. And actually a lot of the sort of graphic design and print centers in the UK were quite worried. They were like, print is dead, everything's going to be digital. Kind of ended up with, we still have a bit of both, I guess. I guess it did maybe kill some things. But that was a great opportunity for me to start getting interested in the web. And I luckily had a great mentor while I was there who started to show me how to update the company website. And that's when I started to get really excited. I was like, this is this kind of perfect marrying of technical and creative work. And I love this. This is what I wanted to do. So a few years later, I decided I needed to go, find myself around the other side of the world, and I backpacked over to Australia and ended up in Kojonup, which I think was the first place to have like more than 1 million sheep or something. I wanted to see the real Australia, not just the cities, and as the pommies do. And I worked in a bar for a while, and it was a fantastic experience, honestly. I learned all of the different glass names, like schooner and pony and all of that, so it was very helpful. But at some point, I started to run out of my savings as a backpacker, and I needed to go and get a real job, as my mum would call it. And so I trekked on over to Sydney. In Sydney, I found I was lucky enough to get offered a job working in government. I just happened to have this good mix of having graphic design experience with web design, and I'd been working with the public sector and government. So they offered me a job, and that turned into a visa, and then eventually it turned into becoming an Australian citizen, luckily for me. So while I was there, I got to meet a lot more of this community, this web community. This is a photo from when I was at what was called a Jelly co-working day. Has anyone heard of Jelly? No, I don't know why it's called Jelly. It's like a really weird thing to explain to people. But while I was there, I started to meet more people who were both kind of creative as well as technical. Here's 3 of my friends that actually lived in that house. On the one closest to me, Michael, he was a PM when I met him, but had a background in engineering and went back into that eventually. He also had good enough UX sensibilities to make decent decisions, good micro interaction decisions. And he ended up being an early engineer at Canva and has done very well for himself. Next to him is Cameron Adams. Some of you might know he went on to be one of the founders of Canva. When I met him, the three of these guys were working together. They had formed an agency, and I'd hired them to do this work. And I was just so impressed at how each of them, but like Cameron especially, was just so good with front end and JavaScript, and as well as like design. And then I realized I'd read some books by him. He's written like, I think 5 books. One of the few books that I actually read cover to cover was The Art and Science of CSS. Because it was entertaining as well as like you learned some stuff. So yeah, he went on to found Canva. Some of you probably heard of that, where he's now the CPO and leads the product and design teams. And then next to him is a guy called Tim Lucas. He was an engineer when I met him, but really loved design and sort of like, again, sort of traversed both. He went on to co-found a company called BuildKite, which is like a testing and deployment CI/CD platform. And so there he wore many hats. He kicked off like the branding for BuildKite and helped also build the actual product. So these guys like kind of showed me that it was okay to be a bit hybrid. You didn't have to just choose one single path. And so that inspired me to keep growing in my hybrid skills. I wanted to do a bit of both, and I learned through them that that was okay. So a little time later, I left government and joined a small boutique design agency. It was called Digital Eskimo, which is not maybe the best name. Doesn't exist anymore, but they did a lot of really interesting creative work, a lot of work for the environment, social change projects. They used to screen their clients because they wanted to only do things that were really positive impact in the world. And so this is where my journey with Git and GitHub began. One day, I think it was July 2010, a couple of the folks at the company were saying that we're going to go and do a hackathon. And do you want to join? And I was like, yeah, I'd never done one before. And so while we're there, this is one of the rooms we were sat in. So while we were there, they were like, hey, why didn't you sign up for GitHub? That's where we're all collaborating on this project together. And I'd kind of heard about it, and I was like, yeah, why not? And that started my journey with Git and GitHub. I also felt really excited to have an excuse to use a terminal and look really cool when other people were sat behind me at the coffee shop. So, but yeah, this is actually the room where I signed up for GitHub. It's so weird that I have a photo of that. So my interest kept growing, and I watched movies like The Social Network, and I was like, oh yeah, I want to go to Silicon Valley and just code and eat pizza and stuff. And then this opportunity came up where there was this hackathon competition. It was run actually by an Aussie called, I think his name is Elias Bizans, something along those lines. And he ran this hackathon called the Startup Bus. And it went from San Francisco initially to South by Southwest, which is a pretty big conference that probably some of you have heard of. So I don't know why, but I was like, yeah, this will be exciting, a hackathon on the bus. I applied, I got in, and so 2 days after I'd first arrived in the States for my first holiday and trip there ever, I got on this bus in San Francisco, and then we drove to South by Southwest. Just so you all know, trying to use tools like trying to create graphics while you're on a wobbly bus is not the most optimal setting. So the picture on the, I can't tell, it's my left, your right, whatever, the other one. That's the team that I was on, and so actually standing next to me in the, there is I have one of these. It's so cool. That guy there is actually Max Mullen, who a year later went on to found Instacart, funnily enough. lots of weird, random stories. But yeah, so he was pitching an idea, and I was chatting to some of the engineers that were in that photo, and they heard that I was a designer. I knew a bit of front end, and I could use Git and GitHub. And they're like, oh, we want you to be on our team. And the team did really well, and it got in the finals. It was really exciting. I was definitely going to quit my job and move to the States for this startup. But we didn't win. But what did happen was we got noticed. And one of the companies that was sponsoring this happened to be looking for a designer. And that turned into a job and me moving to the States about 3 months later. So again, this kind of like ability to live in each of those worlds and have a little bit of that sort of coding exposure and knowing how to use some of the tools that engineers did opened some doors for me. I don't think that was all of the credit is due to like GitHub, but it just opened these doors for me and made a massive impact, literally life-changing experiences. So even though for me it opened doors, I've also still found myself over the years working in companies where they don't really appreciate people who are a bit hybrid. They want you to choose a lane. I remember working in a startup in San Francisco, and the CEO would be like, walk behind my desk, be like, why have you got code on your screen? And I'm like, I just couldn't even understand why that would be a problem. I'm thinking it's faster for me to just like push up this PR than like, I don't know, like upload a bunch of images to like Dropbox, like specify all the like colors, literally walk, because we were in offices then, walk over to the engineer's desk and then be like, have you got it right? No, let me go back here and test this again. And it just seemed I don't know, it just seemed like nuts to me, really. So I know that I'm not the only person that's experienced that, and even in many companies I work in, often organizational structures reflect this divide. There is design and engineering they're separate, and it doesn't make sense to me because really human-computer interaction was born of engineering. So why are we trying to separate this? Like early tools like Front Page and Dreamweaver and stuff were like, you could do both. So why did we separate these things? So I'm going to go down a bit of a trip down memory lane in a second. So to prepare for this interview, I went and talked to some people that actually had the title design engineer, because I'm a big important boss woman now, and so I don't get to they don't let me do quite as much coding or design as I used to, and I wanted to go and chat to people that's their job now. And I also deliberately talked to folks in adjacent roles like software engineering and really technical designers that work on design systems and can also commit code, and some leaders as well. I wanted to get a range of perspectives from within and external to GitHub. So I'm going to take that trip down memory lane for a bit. It's going to be very biased to my view of the last 15 to 20 years and very close to the design and front end world, but also what some of these folks I spoke to shared with me. So can't really talk about the last 15 to 20 years and how design and engineering has evolved without mentioning the infamous iPhone, which destroyed BlackBerry and changed, I guess, people's expectations of what you could do with a phone. And of course, as part of that, it also meant that you could browse. It had a browser bundled with it, right? And of course, not many people's websites were designed to sort of work really well on that tiny screen. I'm curious, who remembers, who here has built a website using tables to do layout? Okay. I feel less old now. Does anyone remember the term liquid layouts? Yeah. That one actually came out way further back than I remember. But I remember talking about liquid layouts before this term, responsive design. But that was basically a method of using percentage-based widths to lay out your page. So it sort of like was better than not having that, but you still got lots of sort of funky layout issues. So yeah, Ethan Marcotte, some of you might know him, kind of coined that term responsive design, and I think a list of part or something might have also like sort of spread that word. But that's when I think for designers, like doing a static mock-up kind of started to not cut it, right? You couldn't really get a feel for it. And that's where I think, that's certainly where I started to get much more into designing in the browser, and a lot of my counterparts did too. You really needed to sort of wiggle the edge of your screen to sort of see how it like really worked. Did I pass? No, I didn't. So along this, along this timeline as well, lots of different approaches to CSS architecture and just like dealing with CSS kind of came out. Hands up if you've heard of all of these. Yeah, I feel like I should have won a prize, shouldn't I? I'll figure something out later. Hands up if you know 3 or more. I feel like a lot more people are cool. Okay, I won't spend too long on this, but just to bring people along on the journey. I'm not going to go into all of them, but I think one of the big ones that's listed up first there is Sass. So 2 of my favorite features when I started using Sass, which is a preprocessor, was variables, which of course now are available in CSS, but weren't at the time. But that was fantastic for allowing you to sort of define colors and fonts and things and like reuse them in many places. And then partials and imports were really useful for kind of like splitting style sheets into sort of more modular, manageable files, and just sort of helped with that sort of like organization and maintainability. So really Sass I sort of thought of as this thing that was trying to do the things that a lot of people wanted CSS to kind of do, and maybe some things that were like, maybe that wasn't such a good idea. Object-oriented CSS was developed by Nicole Sullivan, sorry. And one of the core key patterns that she introduced as part of this was called the media object, and she wrote this fantastic article called, I think it was "The Media Object Saves Thousands of Lines of Code" or something. And basically she observed there was this repeating pattern on Facebook, and that everything kind of made this shape where you needed an image to stay in the same place while the content grew on the other side of it. And basically she came up with a method for writing that, developed this object-oriented CSS philosophy, and one of the parts of that was to separate container from content. So not calling something like homepage nav so that you can't use that nav anywhere else, things like that. So in short, really, all of these approaches were just to sort of fight against the cascade, try and give CSS sort of scope, but not exactly, kind of. And really it was because we were pushing the CSS to go further than what it was designed for, right? It was just to style documents, and we were building these rich web applications. And a lot of these were about kind of increasing that reusability and reducing the number of lines of code, especially in the era where you had, what was it, I had to write it down, 495 selectors was the max for Internet Explorer, and then you had to split the CSS. So I don't know if any of you had that problem, but that was a thing. That's probably also a sign that maybe you do have too many lines of CSS. And then, of course, meanwhile in JavaScript world, some stuff happened there. So we saw some other developments. Node came out, I think, in 2009, which had a big influence, I guess, on the front-end stack. And then you saw things like Angular come out, and then, of course, React, which is hard to not have heard of at this point. Sorry, need a drink of water. So, and then things like CSS3 came out it had features like transitions, animations, gradients. We need more gradients. And I think that sort of started to play a key role in those things together started to play a key role in creating more dynamic and visually appealing websites. more stuff happened. Flat design. A lot of people attribute to the iOS 7, but actually Windows came out with a very flat design, which I think divided a lot of people. I think it was called Metro design language, about a year before. So it was one of the times where Microsoft beat Apple to the punch there. But that really sparked like new design trends as well. We also then realized it was a little bit too flat and needed to add in some depth with like gradients and shadows and stuff like that. I'll keep skipping over because I can't do all of the history. Others will be here for the whole conference. Mobile first. So I think Google started prioritizing indexing mobile versions of websites over desktop. That was in around 2016. Also, I find, side note, I think mobile first design is a really good way to like help prioritize what's on the page. And so I actually find it a really good technique design-wise. But yeah, we were pushed to sort of look at the development of that and the performance and things like that when Google started indexing those first. So all sort of like mounting up, all this stuff is happening. Lots of influential leaders are talking about how to approach HTML and CSS and JavaScript and starting to come up with like ways of architecting CSS and component libraries. Got Bootstrap, Atomic Design by Brad Frost. I told everyone that joined my team to read about HTML semantics and front-end architecture. It was like, don't talk to me until you read this, because I just thought it just cleared up so many things about separating styling from HTML. And I've read a lot of what's his name? Harry, I've forgotten his name. Is it Harry Roberts? Yeah, British guy. Lots of great articles on specificity and lots of interesting hacks and things like that. And that all kind of led up to design systems. Woo! They were so hot right now. I think something else has kind of like maybe taken over that lately. But they kind of really became a thing when around like material design, and Salesforce launched their Lightning design system and actually called it a design system. And that's when that sort of term seemed to really take off. GitHub actually had Primer. They all look a little bit nicer now, but this is like the oldest sort of screenshots I could find. Primer actually started out in 2011 as a Ruby gem that shared styles and shared assets, and then that grew. Then it sort of became like its own CSS framework that now has grown into a much larger ecosystem. But they didn't actually open source it until 2015, about 6 months before I joined, and one of the reasons that I did actually join. Design systems became a thing. Everyone was talking about them. I was, at least. And now every company, lots of companies have a design systems team. And so with the developments in front end, these different approaches to CSS architecture and design systems, you started to see these worlds like merge together even more. And you saw all these kind of new approaches to CSS and JS, which I know some people have some feelings about. And so we went down that path, and I think CSS modules was by an Australian, Glenn, somebody. You seem to know all the answers, so that's why I'm looking at you. And like emotion, style component, style system, stitch has been an abstract. And then I think we all went, actually, we're going to keep CSS a little bit separate. But it was a good journey. Again, I think we were attempting to work with things in a way that the spec didn't allow us to do really easily, and it was like an attempt to have some like control and encapsulate all the things that made like a chunk of UI work and make it more reusable across the whole application. Also, accessibility. That's a really important piece of value. That's the word I'm looking for. It's a really important value to GitHub to deliver a site that everyone can use, no matter what their lived experience is or what assistive technologies they might be needing to use. I actually had a brief experience with this for a week because I managed to completely stack it when it was lightly raining last week in Sydney. Took a trip to the hospital. Luckily didn't break my elbow, but nice bruise. And had a sling for a week. And I was like, oh yeah, I really like voice to text right now. It's really great. And it helped me notice some things about our own website. So, you know, accessibility has grown and grown in importance, and it should be. It should just be like table stakes. And then, I'm getting to a point here, don't worry. And then things like dark mode, that was a thing. I worked on dark mode at GitHub, and we had the most ridiculous like promotion of it because someone had like opened an issue like 7 years prior to say, can we have dark mode? So it was kind of nice to like finally ship that. This is for anyone that's worked on an older application or worked on a design system that didn't start with dark mode. You will know that like backtracking that is like a lot of fun. It's also like one of the best ways to show off like what parts of your application are just not using the design system. So it's like it literally will just not turn dark when you switch dark mode on. So it's the best and one of the most biggest challenges for design systems teams. So my point is all of this stuff is just like happening. There's just more and more pressure, higher expectations on the role of front end and design, and the expectations that users have of the user experience. I think like things like design systems like invited more designers into that sort of world of coding. Like the deeper front end stack started to create space for some more specialization. I think that started to create that space for that in-between world of design engineering. This also led to what Chris Koya of CSS Tricks called the Great Divide. I love this title. Two front-end developers are sitting at a bar. They have nothing to talk about. So this was from his article. It kind of sums up how everything kind of came to a head, or at least in his view. So he says, on one side, an army of developers whose interests, responsibilities, and skill sets are heavily revolved around JavaScript. On the other side, an army of developers whose interests, responsibilities, and skill sets are focused on the other areas of the front end, like HTML, CSS, design, interaction, patterns, and accessibility. And in a way, actually, his article was also kind of like divisive. I don't know that it helped bring the sides together. I thought this is one of the comments that someone shared on the article, and also one of the earlier times I've seen a reference to something like UX engineer. And this guy called Stephen Davis said, "I'm so sick of being great at CSS, but being forced into JavaScript. I am not a programmer. I think we need to move away from the term myself. We should split into UX engineers and JavaScript engineers. They are different mindsets. Most people are not amazing at both JavaScript and CSS." Someone's going to be like, hold my beer. But anyway, he's like, let UX engineers work closely with UX design to create great designs, interactions, prototypes, etc. And let JavaScript engineers handle all the data parts. So people had a lot of feels. Another person, Brad Frost, who also wrote Atomic Design, which also people are divided over, said, he started to call it front of the front end and back of the back end, or that, like, he popularized that term, I think. And then that sort of like kind of described this sort of divide across the stack. A bit later, quite recently, not a bit later, this is in 2023, Zach Letherman wrote a response saying, "I vehemently reject that I have to exclusively choose one side, and perhaps that is best reflected by my work." And so Chris Coyier responded to this and reflected back on his post, The Great Divide, and saying that it was indeed divisive after seeing this post from Zach. And I think so we sort of like, all this pressure built up, we got angry at each other. Some people didn't want to write JavaScript, only wanted to write CSS. And then some people were like, I just want to write what I want to write. I want to be living in this hybrid world. So this is all building up, and then, oh hi, AI came around the corner and added more to the pile. So I want to talk a little bit about, this is my bit on AI. I know there's been a lot of great talks today on AI, but I want to talk about how it's influencing the growth of design engineering. And don't tell me you don't do puns with AI. I have a guy on my team called Chad, so he gets the Chad GPT one quite a lot. Where am I? Okay. So in talking to some of those design engineers and technical designers, one of the first things that came up with working with AI is that to test like different ideas, you need to escape like the mock-ups. You need to jump out of Figma because they can't really do AI experiences justice. I think this is kind of similar to how responsive design sort of pushed designers into designing in the browser. You needed to get a feel for it. You need to build it to really experience it. One example of this is like the fact that responses are non-deterministic. So you can literally input the same prompt using the same model, and you will get slightly different responses, sometimes very different responses. In this one, it kind of generally was like roughly the same, but yeah, it's not exactly the same. And so designers need to understand that the quality also of the response, not just that it's different, can also significantly impact that overall user experience. And so while designers have been used to working with sites where they can't control what the user-generated data is, this is like another level, another paradigm of not being able to control the output, and that's where you really need to get in there and feel it. Designers also working on AI at GitHub, at least I found, and other folks that I've spoken to, often also getting into these really difficult places where we're deciding do we design around the bad responses to make the experience tolerable, or do we hope that the model catches up? So as an example of this, when Copilot first shipped in June 2021, that was like our technical preview. A year later, we made it generally available. We used this thing called ghost text, which is that like gray text that sort of auto-completes what you're typing and suggests some code. And the idea was that this would like keep developers in the flow because they could either ignore it or use it, and they didn't have to navigate away from the IDE in order to use it. The AI just did the work in the background. I know not everyone loves this all the time, but that was like a solution to making it so that we could keep developers in flow without pulling them out of that experience, and so that they could ignore those suggestions that were just not very good from the LLM. But we've seen an increase in growth in new models being released. Like the time between them is like really decreasing. This is the best diagram that I could find. You'd have to like walk right up the screen to see it. But yeah, you can just see that they're coming out more of them and faster. And so I thought it would, oops, sorry, I touched the mic. The audio guy is going to be mad at me. He said, don't take your jacket off. I'll keep this on for the whole time now. So I thought this, I was listening to this podcast interview with Kevin Weil, who is the CPO at OpenAI, and he talked about this concept called model maxillism. And it's the idea that AI models will improve so quickly that it's better to build for capabilities that are just emerging rather than extensively scaffolding around current limitations. This approach acknowledges that today's AI models are the worst that you will ever use for the rest of your life. And so this is OpenAI's philosophy that they take on. And I think we're sort of in this place right now where that's starting to become the right way to work, but it's not always that cut and dry. Sometimes we're still having to decide whether to make decisions between the capabilities of the model and the overall user experience. And to really get a sense of how LLMs work and what's currently possible or what might be around the corner, designers have to go pretty deep and work in many of the same tools that engineers do. They need to be able to test with models, understand what they might be good for, understand things like filters and the impact of like slower response time if it's thinking and reasoning. Because basically your interface is with the AI is an API. So because of that, we've been increasing our hires on design and engineers. Literally, we tended to be a fairly technical team at GitHub in design, but we've definitely been increasing that and hiring more design engineers across like the Copilot product design team, which is our AI tool. There's some good things though in that. So not just designing with AI is also like kind of, you've probably heard this before, it's lowering the floor and raising the ceiling. So it's lowering the engineering skills a designer might need to have to get started with development. And it's also raising the ceiling for designers to get further with engineering. I was chatting with one of our design engineers the other day, and he was saying that he'd been working in Rails for like, because we're moving to React on the front end, but a lot of GitHub is still in Rails, and certainly is on the back end. And he was like, he'd been working on Rails front end for quite a long time and needed to move on to a different project using React. And he just said Copilot just really helped him like refresh his memory, get faster, know how to like do things that he knew how to do in Rails, in React more quickly. So it just helps you get further along that path. There's also a lot of tools that let you get from idea to code a lot faster, especially with models like Vision, that where you are seeing a lot more tools that you can put a design in and spit out some type of code. That's great for designers to prototype with and share an idea. It's also great for engineers who maybe can't design as well, and even PMs, right? There's a lot of tools to try. Ones I am authorized to tell you about are GitHub's Spark. You'll hear some more updates on this in the near future, but this is from GitHub Next, who is our like kind of R&D team, and put out a technical preview at last year's GitHub Universe, which is our annual conference. And we've been developing that, and this is something you can go and try. I think you just have to sign up for a wait list. There are tons of free tools out there, including GitHub Copilot. That is now also free for people to use in either VS Code or on the actual web platform as well. And there's tons more out there. So it's also fair to say that AI is starting to make it easier for engineers to design too. I think like, although design is like arguably like more subjective, it's a little bit harder to say that's done compared to development. And it can't like exactly make a judgment. It doesn't have taste exactly. You can still, if you give it a good enough prompt, you can say, hey, I want to make a successful e-commerce platform. This is the market, the audience that I'm going for. And you can say, and then you can point to like a successful e-commerce website and say, make it look like this. And so if you get the prompts right, you can achieve quite a lot. It's getting a little scary. And so, yeah, so I think, overall, like the lines from both sides, from design to code and engineering to design, are getting blurrier and blurrier. And I think that sort of like created that space and invited this space for design engineering. So we've got, like I was saying earlier, design systems like invited designers to code a bit more. Now AI is adding on to that. Deeper front end, allowing more space for specialization. So let's actually talk about the role of design engineering. Why is it surfacing as a discipline, and what does it look like? What might you need? What skills might you need? What does the day-to-day look like? So one of the things that came up is that there's design engineering as a sort of a task, and then there's design engineer as the title. So most people felt that there was this distinct difference between having that title versus like technical designer that might do some tasks that are described as design engineering. In the case where someone is professionally called a design engineer and has that title, they are expected to have very technical skills. They need to be able to ship code, but they should also be able to make design decisions in code. They should have taste as well. And they may start they may start a project in Figma and then move into code. They might still collaborate with other engineers to get that full project like production ready, but they're expected to ship code and do that responsibly and do that well. Another thing that came up is that front-end engineers, what's the difference between a front-end and a design engineer? A lot of people felt that front-end engineers were not responsible for coming up with a design solution. At GitHub, it doesn't mean that a software engineer can't have good UX sensibilities and contribute to the ultimate user experience, but they're not necessarily don't have that responsibility quite at the level like a designer or a design engineer does to come up with a solution. Our design engineers can take everything from design to a level of implementation, even if they're needing to like pair with people on the sort of far edges of that. Another thing that came up that I don't want to forget is that in many companies, people feel that as a front-end developer, you're often tested in whatever stack they're working with and JavaScript, but rarely on CSS. It seems like that's fallen off the radar for a lot of companies. Also, I should have said earlier, like if anyone here is a design engineer or wants to be that and has opinions, I would love also to make this talk better and make my research better. And if you've had a different experience, I'd love to hear that. But from the people that I've talked to and what I've seen over the years, that sort of testing for CSS skills has like fallen away quite a lot. One of the ultimate things is that you get shorter feedback loops. So someone that can make decisions in code can like think of the idea, implement it, and then test the experience of that. And that's one of the greater benefits of being able to not only design, but also implement. And then, how am I doing on time? Okay. And then the other thing that I want to talk about is design engineering is also a spectrum itself. There are different types of design engineers. They might share the same skills, but they might have a bit of a different day-to-day depending on what team they work on. So some examples of this, we have design engineers on our brand and marketing teams, and they're the people that seems to be one of the teams that people most often hire design engineers into, because we're really trying to like differentiate ourselves and have those really delightful like marketing experiences. So this often includes quite like creative work, really delightful interactions. If you haven't been to the Copilot page, you can play with it and make it blink and bounce and stuff. It's really just really fun. You can waste some time doing that sometimes. But this work, because it's like got to convert, right? It also means working on performance as well, and no one likes scroll janking and things like that. So like they're not only trying to do really impressive, delightful interactions, they've also got to be highly performant as well. So they're often like got that networks tab open as well. A lot of design engineers said to me that they really like tools that let them look at design and code together. So again, like not separating it. So one of those examples that's pretty popular is Storybook. This happens to be showing one of the engineers using Storybook with one of GitHub's variable fonts, Mona Sans, which we collaborated with an agency to develop. Speaking of Mona Sans, that's another thing that a design engineer did too, is like to make it easier to work on creative projects. They developed Mona Sans and Hubert Sans variable fonts, which you can also download and use yourself if you want. There's a really beautiful website. I'm sure you'll find it if you Google it. But yeah, just like really creative, delightful stuff like that. A lot of our design engineers started on design systems as well. That's definitely, you're literally bridging design and code, design and engineering roles there. So like working on system foundations, design tokens, how we scale patterns across the product. Many of those folks are as comfortable using Figma as they are using code. And then, sorry, I couldn't get a better video of this one. Also, like design engineers are like working on product features now. I was saying earlier, we've been increasingly hiring design engineers to work on Copilot. This is an example of Copilot Workspace where one of our technical designers and a design engineer collaborated on this to not only come up with the concept and the general experience, where they built like high fidelity prototypes, they also helped implement the front end for that. So it's really sort of showing like how far across that design to code spectrum folks can work. And then I just wanted to give a shout out to my team who hope maybe they'll watch this. I don't know, they probably heard me speak enough. But one of the really lovely things that has come out of sort of blurring these worlds is a much better sign-up experience that is not only absolutely stunning and beautiful, it is also accessible. And I was so proud to see this article go out by a customer called Anne Beauvalet. I've probably botched that pronunciation, sorry. But yeah, she was a customer, gave us some feedback a couple of years ago, and the team collaborated to really make this not only delightful and impressive, but also accessible, and it just sort of shows you can do that work. Okay, we've got about 10 minutes left. I want to really quickly touch on human advantages with creativity, because I can't help but thinking about AI and creativity and where we as humans still have some advantages over that. I stole some ideas from Aveta Patrice Sampson, who spoke at Figma's conference Config last year. She used to work at Google, and she talked about how humans are wired for creativity. And I sort of took her concept and applied my own experience and meaning to it. So one of the things she sort of talked about was dreaming, humans dream. And last year or the year before, I got to go to Barcelona for the first time. And while I was there, I got to see Basilica de la Sagrada Familia. I don't speak Spanish. But yeah, it was absolutely amazing. Like, I just was like, how did someone think this up? It's just absolutely incredible. If you get the chance to go and you haven't, I highly recommend it. And what's really like interesting to me is like the fact that it's been built over such a long time as well. So as well as like some human imagination just coming up with this, it also means that like you are seeing a different version of this over time, because it's taken it's like years and years and years and years and years. So someone that went to visit it 5 years ago and gonna have seen, if they come now, they'll see like different parts of this being built, and it's just, yeah, it's absolutely stunning. And I just, yeah, you've got to go there. Another aspect is drawing. This is me getting my arty side out, so hopefully you'll be able to like follow me here. I was listening to this interview with a guy called Oliver Jeffers, who apparently illustrates like some fantastic children's books. And Aveda, when she was talking about drawing, was saying, you know, drawing releases like endorphins to the brain, regardless of whether you think you can draw or not. You often feel good when you do that. Maybe not if you're not a designer in front of other people. I don't know. I haven't gone that deep on it. But what I found interesting is how different people capture what they see in different styles and focus on different elements. And Oliver said this really interesting thing. He said, everything in life is changed when he learned to stop copying others and listen to the way that his hand wanted to draw and paint. He said, most human beings attempt to draw a straight line and it's never perfect. But all those wiggles and bumps in that attempt, that is your style. That is the way your hand likes to move and how to draw. You don't really find your style finds you. So another case of like, yes, you could give this to a vision model and say, draw a line, but it's only that line there has the bumps and wiggles in it because I drew it, not an LLM. I think that Andy Warhol is another interesting person that sort of breaks the rules. Humans do that all the time. I'm not going to tell you about all the times I have, so I don't get in trouble. But yeah, he's like really controversial because he makes people question what art really is, and it also makes me, wonder how AI will influence the definition of creativity as well. So I really think that there is a place for humans in the loop. One that's really close to me, my late auntie Sheila was an artist. She also actually had a successful career in IT and before she got into art, so another like hybrid person. And she was really interested in making art with found objects. And so this art is not only how it is because of how she all pieced it together and how her hand draws lines and paints and stuff, but because of the literal found objects that she found around where she was walking. And again, like you can give an LLM an image and say, make it like this. But in looking at this, I know that it's like that because a person created it and because they found this stuff and then made art with it. The one on the far right, the dance rehearsal, that's got another dimension to it because it's also like that because of the movements that particular person made. So, and I can't like really talk about all this without thinking about like happy accidents because our brand at GitHub is a happy accident too. One of the founders grabbed what we now call the Octocat off a stock illustration site and put it on our 404 page, and the rest is history. And now we have like Disney level, like animated like cartoons with Mona in. Some people love our like brand so much that they have actually got it tattooed on them. And it's just like, someone really laughed at, oh no, they're coughing, sorry. They got choked up, sorry. But yeah, it's just like, it's everywhere and it's now our logo as well. And just for a happy accident, I don't know how you could make that happen with an LLM, maybe. So to round it out, coming back to design engineering and traditional design, not traditional, I guess the world of design I live in, less arty. What is the future of software design? How will like AI influence our creativity and the way that we work? I want to reference Wilson Miner. He did one of my favorite design talks called When We Build. I think it's probably, I was going to say a couple of years old, but I know that whenever I say that, it's actually 10 or 20 years old. So it's when we build, and he says, in the talk, he says, as more of the tools we live with every day become digital instead of physical, our opportunity and responsibility as designers is multiplying. We live in a world of screens, and we are the ones who decide what goes on them. We are in a unique position to have an impact, one that lasts longer than the next redesign or the latest technology. So design is not just how it looks, it's how it works, it's how it feels, it's the experience that it creates for people. And we need to be mindful of how we're influencing tools in this new medium with AI. There are still many of the same skills as designers that we are still very useful to step into those customer shoes and take on that responsibility. We're just using new different technologies and ways to approach like what we create. Dylan Field, who's the CEO of Figma, says like, yeah, you might be able to like write a really detailed 30-page brief, but you're still gonna need a designer to make some of those calls, and there still needs to be a human in the loop. He thinks that what ends up happening is that we'll have a chance to facilitate making it so that you can get to that first draft of something faster, and you can explore the possibility space of what can happen faster. And that he is leading Figma, but he's very optimistic, and he's like, AI should be a way for designers to have even more superpowers and actually give them more power in an organization. So hope he's right. And yeah, at some point we'll stop talking about it. I will very soon. And it will just be part of the stack. We won't need to point it out anymore, and I'm sure some folks are excited for that day. Yeah, and you still need taste and style and all the things that influence creativity. AI is just going to be like another medium that influences us. And I do see like design engineering as being a critical role in the future of design because of this. Regardless of technology, the skills we need, or the org structure, like I hope that we can kind of embrace these like blurry edges and not feel the need to separate them. Or, as a quote I really love from a friend of mine called Jem Gold, you can do whatever you want, and there is gold in the intersections. Thank you very much.